In order to install a custom car audio system, we oftentimes need to connect an additional wire to our vehicle's battery. Now, back when vehicles were much more simple, we could take the factory battery connection, we could remove it from the battery, we could cut this, and we could just reinstall this existing wire into an aftermarket battery terminal, which would also allow us to add additional wires for our new connection. But today's latest vehicles have many additional features on this battery connection, and we can't simply cut it. Not to mention, if your vehicle is a lease or if you just want to maintain the original integrity of the vehicle, cutting is not an option anyhow. A few years ago, I reviewed KnuKoncept's solution for these problems with this, the KnuKonceptz ULTIMATE Battery Terminal. With this terminal, one could use a post adapter to easily relocate the OEM battery connection while adding in new connectivity. But the only downside with this terminal is it is difficult to use with a recessed style battery, where the terminal is recessed down inside of this groove. I simply can't get at this connection here in order to tighten this terminal onto the battery. Introducing the new Ultimate Battery Terminal, the UBT20. This new terminal has many features to allow for adding aftermarket wiring while allowing us to still retain that OEM wiring connection. But it also features a unique design solution which allows us to access the set screw in order to tighten on a recessed battery terminal. Let's take a deeper look. So the first thing to notice about the UBT20 is it has this rubber protective boot on the outside. You'll notice there is an additional screw on each side of the terminal. We'll talk about that more later. You'll see that there are two ports that allow connections for our aftermarket wiring. There's a hole here and a hole here on the opposite side that allows us to tighten this bolt. We'll talk about that more later. And this terminal not only comes in a positive version, but also a negative version as well. And the only difference between these two is the size of the hole. And that's because battery terminals have different size terminals based on whether or not they are positive or negative. Dimensionally, the UBT20 has a width of about 2 3/4 inches, maybe slightly more once you add terminals to these screws. It has a depth of about 2.5 inches when you factor in the edge of the boot. And it has a height that is just under 1 3/8 inches. Do keep in mind though that the dimensions needed are going to change based on the different accessories that we can possibly use. We're going to talk more about these in a minute. So on the aftermarket wiring connections, there is a 0 gauge connection and a 4 gauge connection. If you make a comparison to the old version of the Ultimate Battery Terminal, you'll notice that the old version had an 8 gauge, and they got rid of that just for size reasons and to allow clearance for the connection method here that we're going to talk about. But that's no big deal because they've added these two side screws, and these side connections allow us to add ring terminals of any size as needed. Having one of these on each side gives us a lot of options for the different size wires we may want to attach, and it also gives us a lot of flexibility if there are clearance issues in the vehicle. We're not forced to use one side, we could always use the other. Now, as we've already kind of mentioned, the other huge advantage of the UBT20 is not only the ability to add ring terminals as needed, but we could also be using these for OEM integration options. I showed you guys these briefly earlier. These are the KnuKonceptz post adapters. So let's say that this is our OEM positive battery connection. We know that a lot of times this connection on today's latest vehicles is far more complicated, and that's why we don't want to cut this. Instead, we simply want to basically relocate the location of this positive terminal. We're going to do that using the UBT20. One option is to use one of the top post adapters. The top post adapter just simply screws into the side in that same hole that we used before, and depending on the connection that you have in your vehicle, this may or may not be the best choice, but you can see in this case, it allows us to just relocate that connection to the side. The other option is to use one of these, the vertical top post adapter, and in this case, obviously, the adapter is now vertical and on the top, and it would simply relocate this connection from where it originally was to right here. And not only that, also remember that this post adapter could be located on either side of the terminal. So I could simply switch it over to the other side here, and obviously you'd want to tighten that down with an Allen wrench, but you can see you have a ton of different flexibility for where you want that terminal to be, which can allow for a cleaner installation. Now, we mentioned a couple times how a recessed battery terminal like this one here, where the post is recessed down into this little nook, can pose a challenge for aftermarket battery terminals, because a lot of times the set screw to tighten them down will be on this side, and you can't get the Allen key down in there. And that's the advantage of this new clamp screw design that KnuKonceptz has come up with. If we pop the terminal out of its boot here, I want to show you guys just how easy it is to change the orientation of this screw. So I'm using a 4mm Allen key, and I'm just going to completely unscrew this from the terminal. Hold our finger behind there so that doesn't drop out. So I've got that screw removed. And all we need to do is change the location of these two brass pieces. So I'm going to take this one out and I'm going to swap them. And the reason for these flat grooves here is just so that we can line them up. We want them to be in a straight line. That way our screw can go through and land inside of the threads. And I'm just going to get this started here. Tighten my Allen wrench. We'll just get it barely finger tight so that it's not sandwiching this down at all. Put my boot back on, and you can see the boot has an access hole here. We used to have to access through this side, but we've changed our orientation now. So now we're going to access from the same side as our aftermarket wiring. So now when we go to use this terminal on a recessed battery groove, we have no problem. We can tighten this down perfectly from the outside here, and we're good to go. So let's run through a little mock installation here. Let's say that I have some 4-gauge wire that's going to go to some other accessory in the vehicle. I've got my wire ferrule on there along with the heat shrink, and I'm going to go ahead and put it into that 4-gauge port here on the UBT20. And on the bottom of the terminal, I'm going to tighten down that set screw. For this set screw, it is that 4mm Allen key. All right, that's good and tight. Now let's add our big old beefy 0-gauge connection. Let's say this is going back to our power distribution block for all of our amplifiers that we're adding. I've got the set screw backed out there. We'll put that in its spot as well. And in this case, we're using a 5mm Allen key. We'll tighten that up. So we've got our two aftermarket connections made. Now let's say, just for an example, that our factory connection was here, and we just want to simply relocate it slightly to about right here. What we're going to be doing is we're going to use, in this case, the vertical top post adapter. I'll position it on the side here and add the screw. And in this case, we're going to be using a 6mm Allen key to tighten it down. So we've got that added, and don't forget we have an additional port that we could still connect additional wiring to with a ring terminal if need be. For simplicity's sake, on our install, we're going to say that we're good to go here. Let's add it on top of the terminal. And don't forget, even though this is now a recessed battery terminal, we're not going to have any issues with getting our 4mm screw in here because we've relocated it to this other side so we can tighten this down. So there we go. We are good and solid on the battery. The only thing left to do is add our OEM battery terminal and tighten this down. And now we've relocated that OEM battery terminal and added our additional aftermarket wiring. So next time you need to connect additional wiring to your vehicle's battery, definitely consider the UBT20, especially if you have one of those recessed battery terminals that is difficult to use. The UBT20 makes it easy with that reconfigurable design. You guys can learn more about these at the links down in the video description. A special thanks to KnuKonceptz for being a sponsor of the channel and sponsoring this video. And thank you guys for tuning in and watching.